everybody. My name's Alex Cohen. I'm a member of the media. I feel like I'm outing myself at an AA meeting and an event like today. I'm the political anchor at Spectrum News One. So if you have Spectrum cable, you probably see me all the time. If you don't, you probably have no idea who I am, and that's okay. Because it's really about the two gentlemen we have here on this stage. I know that we got to hear a little bit from you, Stephen, earlier today. So, Mike, we're going to jump into it because we're a little short on time. Okay. There are so many ways in which the world of media and politics is intersected in your life. Maybe just give us a couple bullet points so that anybody here who does not know the brilliant political mind that you are can get a better sense of it.
Well, I'm very good at writing my own introduction, clearly. That was, and my mom couldn't have done a better job. Thank you, and thank you all for being here. I'm a conservative Republican, so I'm angry, and I'm a writer in Hollywood, so I'm bitter. So I'm can hardly wait to discuss this stuff. I've worked in practical politics my whole career on the media and messaging side. I was chief strategist for John McCain on the Straight Talk Express once upon a time for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger here in California, Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, a lot of the Republican governors and senators over more than 35 years. So I came out here to run Arnold's campaign, and I've been selling creativity to politics, so I stayed around and have kind of dabbled in that. Still do a lot of messaging work in politics. I'm one of the leaders of the Trump-hating small but elite wing of the Republican Party.
And Stephen, we got to hear a little bit about your career and path earlier today, but maybe an example or two from you about when media and politics is intersected in your life.
Well, my first gig before I even got into politics was in the media. I was a radio DJ for a local station in Milwaukee. I was a music DJ, but very community-oriented, and so we would engage with a number of local causes. And that was the first kernel of inspiration to see how media, entertainment, music, and key social and political issues can converge. And then I went on this journey for about a decade running the Millennial Action Project, which grew to be the largest organization of young elected officials in the country, bipartisan, really cross-partisan, people working at the congressional and state level. We founded the first ever caucus of young members of Congress that brought together young Democrats and Republicans, and were during that time able to pass over 32 bipartisan bills through Congress, including one that I was particularly proud of was the first bipartisan gun violence prevention bill in over a generation, but also hundreds of bills at the state level, including on issues like criminal justice reform. And one moment that I think exemplifies this connection is we had the chance to partner with a film called Just Mercy, starring Michael B. Jordan. And it sounds like a number of you have seen that film. And they created an impact campaign out of it to try and translate the issues of that film around criminal justice reform into concrete legislative action. So we partnered with them on this, did a number of activation events with our young legislators around the country. And during that period of time, we were able to pass bipartisan legislation in states like Arkansas and Wisconsin and many other states. And I think that was a really great example of how we can take a moment on the big screen where we've developed an audience and in some ways even developed a demand that cut across party lines, turn that into concrete action, bipartisan legislation that was passed. And then I ran for the U.S. Senate in Wisconsin to try and elevate this to the next level, and learned a lot through that, the role of media in politics. And as I was running, I would talk a lot about structural democracy issues, like the role of money in causing the divide and incenting the divide that we have, the role of the closed primary system, and also further exacerbating the divide. I know we have a lot of ranked choice voting folks in the audience here. Shout out to them. But I also realized that media is a democracy reform issue too, and that was partly what brought me to this conversation today.
You say the word bipartisan. It's very refreshing to hear, especially as we careen towards what I'm pretty sure is going to be yet another government shutdown. We've been hearing a lot about political divisiveness this afternoon, and I'd like us to kind of roll back a little bit and hear from both of you. And Mike, let's start with you. What do you think is at the foundation of the divided America we see today? What's driving it, and what role might media play in that?
That's a great question. It is not easy to answer. It is a complicated formula of many things. Everything from the decline of real wages, when people feel economic pain, they lose trust in institutions, to a pop culture that is often about conflict. I can't walk by a Housewives that fill in the blank and not see an adult throwing a wine glass at somebody. You know, I miss middlebrow culture in America. It is the tribalism of our two parties, the governing equation now among the bases that operate both parties. And I'll cop to the fact that Repubs, my side, for 40 years, it's heartbreaking, are worse. But the equation is, we're right, you're evil. And when that becomes the equation, you justify doing anything. Lock her up. She's evil. I'm a hero for saying it. I'm a hero for storming the Capitol. I'm saving the country. It's like any good supervillain movie. The villain thinks they're doing the right thing. And it is the same. And of course, it compounds. In the old days with campaigns, you would go to elites. I don't care if the light or ref. You're meeting with the head of the AFL or you're meeting with the head of the Chamber of Commerce. And you had to be sane and show candidate skills. From that came money. Money bought publicity. Now with the internet, I can tweet a joke right now to my 20,000 foolish followers and blow up my entire career and get endorsed by 26 Nazis all for free in 5 seconds. The internet spins out for free messaging, and the toxic stuff that is more intense goes better and farther. And there are for-profit businesses, I'll say as a good capitalist, that have built a business model out of this. I've worked for NBC for, I think, 2.5 decades now. Russert started me out on Meet the Press because I hated talking points. Wasn't so great for my Republican career, was fun for the punditry career. And they're great, and I've enjoyed my time there. But there's a P&L at the top of that. There's a reason Donald Trump, who is Conflict Incorporated, gets more cable coverage and did in 2016 by a factor of about 7 than any other candidate. So it is a tribalism bonfire being fed by social media and the free ability of the internet to transmit messages without curation, combined with, it's a pretty good business model. Ask any pro wrestling promoter. They line up around the block to watch the revenge fight, even though it's fixed.
So many great answers in that, Stephen. I want to, because there are two great words that I really believe in, and we've heard them today: yes and. I want to know what your yes and is to that, and also because Mike and I come from a different generation, safe to say. As a younger person and someone who has put that run into politics, are you seeing as much of that divisiveness among the next generation of Americans?
Well, I'll start with WWE. Yes, and I used to do a conference once a year here in LA called Politicon, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's meant to be the Comic-Con for politics. The tagline was entertain democracy, and you would bring some of the most opposite, fiery political commentators you see on television, from Ben Shapiro to Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks and Tucker Carlson, and bring them onto a stage together and sort of let the fireworks happen. And I remember being backstage for one of those. It was for the Ben Shapiro, Cenk Uygur debate. And they threw people like me in the middle of that, by the way. And we're sitting backstage, and the audience is fired up. I mean, you can hear both sides chanting, like pounding things. It was like crazy. And I remember one of the guys goes, "Welcome to the Thunderdome." Meanwhile, you have this Thunderdome scene going on outside. Inside, in the green room, and you have both of them sharing photos of their kids. You have them talking about all the areas they have common ground on. They're humanizing each other. They're talking about a number of areas they could work together on. And I thought that was just a beautiful contrast, a beautiful contradiction, that we're getting ready for the Thunderdome, and we have these two opposite commentators essentially having an inclusive conversation and a respectful one. Then we go outside, and people are definitely fired up. But I did see an opportunity to create something that was both entertaining and informative and humanizing at the same time. And I think we were able to accomplish that. So I think what's really going on here is, and I think, Mike, you spoke to this a bit, with the incentives, I've worked with a lot of elected leaders who, in private, are extremely cordial, respectful, really thoughtful, actually. Some of the biggest firebrands you see on TV are actually some of the most thoughtful people in private. And then you put in a TV camera, and it's like, they just go wild. And so what's really going on there? Why would you show up that differently privately versus publicly? And it gets to this mixed set of incentives that we're talking about here, the money, media, industrial complex that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Why do politicians have to talk like this? Because they have an insatiable and unlimited demand to be constantly raising money. Well, what's the easiest way to raise money? By stoking fear and division in the American public. So that is the business model. That's the system I think we need to change. And I think with Millennial Action Project and a number of efforts represented in this room, we're able to help close that gap. But I think one thing we can do with storytelling is also to bring to the surface, we were talking earlier about hopeful and aspirational narratives. I think bring to the surface the idea that we don't have to act like this. Because at the grassroots level, when you talk with voters, I think you see that voters I saw this on the campaign trail all the time, where voters, they're taking cues by the media that they're hearing and consuming. But then when you get deeper and you have the real conversation, they kind of go, wait, why are we talking like this? Why is there so much vitriol? And you realize that there is so much more that we can agree on and so much more that we can do together when you have the real conversation and you're talking with each other instead of talking past each other.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment. And as you're saying all of this, I don't know, did anyone last night watch Sean Hannity and Gavin Newsom? I'm sorry, y'all. It was great frickin' television.
Yeah.
I was like hooked. And you've got two smart guys, two very different perspectives going at each other. If they were agreeing and seeing eye to eye, are you going to get that same kind of viewership? So how do you kind of unwind this division? How do you use media to get to that kind of place? Because, I'm hearing boring, tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. And I'm a grizzled old political consultant, so I've been on the friction side of American politics for a long time. I hate common ground. Because what is common ground? Mush? We're not supposed to agree on everything. What a dead society if we agree that we're for puppy dogs, ice cream, and against climate change. Oh, God, I like disagreement. I like argument. Here's what I don't like. Destroying the idea there's a common set of facts and destroying the idea that your opponent isn't your enemy. I like a good, tough election. I'm a conservative. I think we used to, before we took this little fascist detour, I think we had a lot of better public policy solutions. I spent my whole life in crappy hotels helping various knuckleheads get elected to Congress for what we used to call the cause. So I like disagreement. And a lot of what we do here at the USC Center for the Political Future is how do we incentivize fair fights, not you stole the election because I lost. Not fake news, all that. Where you start to polarize, where everybody has their own news source, often uncurated, that tells them they're right. And that is the first thing, if you look at the history of authoritarian governments, they do is destroy objective news. The first thing. Once you have a common set of facts and you've destroyed that, then what happens? People get scared. And what do people do when they're scared? They go tribal. So I'm not for Candyland, happy together for the sake of together, but I am for having a spirited public debate with rules of fairness and mutual respect. We never have had it totally in America. We tend to romanticize the past a little, but we've run off the rails now. And that has created a climate. I'll finish up with candidates now, and Trump really invented this, but invention has imitators in politics, has taken away shame. Shame used to be a great magnetic field to keep people in line who are often ruled by their own insecurities, great talents, and ambition. Richard Nixon had shame. He's Gandhi compared to what we're dealing with now. He resigned. A couple of grown-ups told him, knew it was right, off he went. Trump just deny and move forward like a mindless shark. and it works for Trump. So guess what? More people are learning it now. And that's why I think it all comes back to pop culture, because pop culture does set political culture now. When a Kardashian runs for president, we're seeing the final chapter of this. I'm praying not, but it could happen. I'm the guy who did Schwarzenegger's campaign. That was the first crossover. And to Arnold's credit, he took it really seriously. You know, he didn't call up Sean Hannity for advice, he called up Warren Buffett. But now we have a guy who literally became famous in prime time on NBC by firing Gary Busey for not selling enough snow cones. Gary was paid to pretend to work for him. Parlayed that perception, and in my business, perception is reality, of a can-do, can make it happen outside Washington, not one of the politicians, middle-class rage monster. He'll straighten out D.C. The polling shows number one thing people thought Trump would do in 2016 is get stuff done. And it was all a myth. Cardboard set looked like a boardroom. But it worked because our pop culture accepted it. And so people like to kind of parcel off politics and complain about it. The root causes are bigger. And unless we all want to learn Chinese in the next 20 years, we just need a massive civic awakening, or the politics are going to get worse, not better.
I got a footnote, Mike, because you and I were both there. Let us remember that where did Arnold Schwarzenegger declare that he was running for governor? He did it on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and even Jay didn't know that that was coming.
Right.
I did. But, Stephen,
Yeah.
I want to get
Yes.
your input on, how if this has gotten us into this cyclone where it gets more and more and more, and shame has basically evaporated,
Right.
what are some of the ways that we can undo that?
One of, like you mentioned, Mike, the problems run really deep, and this lack of shame in politics is an interesting framing, because I think a lot about who decides to be involved in the first place. And that has a deep connection with culture and the stories we're telling. When you think about the aspirational view, the aspirational culture that came out of the West Wing era, you had a lot of members of my generation who decided to get involved in politics, sometimes for the first time in their life. And that was really special, and that created a certain moment in American politics. Now, I would say more recently, we've been fed at least a decade of cynical political narratives through shows like Veep and Scandal, and most notably House of Cards. And of course, some of those narratives are appealing, but one of the questions I get asked all the time, and Mike, I'm curious if you got asked this, is like your friends who you grew up with, they ask, so is House of Cards, is that how Congress really works? Did you get this question too?
Oh, yeah.
And how'd you answer that?
Well, it's funny, I'm so old, I've been doing this a long time. We used to say, you'd see the intern running out crying. And somebody say, what happened? Oh, the candidate threw a ham sandwich at the West Wing kid. Because we always had an idealistic intern who came in and then found out the West Wing had very little to do with what is in politics. It has something to do with what ought to be in politics, though it could have used an evil Democrat and a non-clownish Sergeant Schultz Republican, in my view, which I told him, and I lasted 28 seconds as a consultant. But now you're right that total cynicism. We're going to have them killed. That's what they do on the Spacey show there. Double irony. So yeah. The pop culture informs what they think politics would be. As long as we get the good half and we motivate them into politics, I'm kind of happy.
Yeah.
But politics is a good dramatic area because it's like everything else humans are involved in.
Absolutely.
I always tell, should I go into politics as a kid? Sure. You're going to meet the best people you've ever met in your life and the worst people.
Absolutely. And just to build on that, I think and by the way, I'll just, on the House of Cards point, the way I've answered that is, short of directly murdering people, a lot of that stuff I have seen, frankly. I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen those rooms, and I'm sure you have too. The difference, though, is that's not all that's going on.
Right.
There are other things happening at the same time. So it's just a choice of which stories are we going to elevate. And to sort of combat this idea that the more aspirational view of politics can't be sexy and appealing, it's exactly what you said, Mike, that the practice of politics is one that is deeply personal, it's emotional, it's character testing, it's challenging your core ethics. that's the stuff of good stories, and how you navigate all of those corrupting influences, how you navigate that sense of right versus wrong when it's never a clear right versus wrong, and where do you decide to compromise, and where do you decide to stick to your guns. That's good stuff. That's good content, and politics happens to be a discipline that sort of brings that out. So I just think it's a question of which stories we're choosing to tell.
Yeah, I used to ask candidates, they'd always, especially new ones, damn it, I'm not going to sell out. I'm never going to ask you to sell out, but I do need to know your rental price. Because I got to get you through an election. And one thing candidates have in common of both parties, they are damn scared and somewhat hateful of the voters. Because individually, you're all great. Put you together in a herd, you can act like locusts. And the first thing you learn in elected politics is careful, because the Jimmy Stewart speech doesn't work. And we buried a lot of good polls who tried it.
Right.
I was thinking of you last night, Mike, before the debate that happened last night in Simi Valley. Doug Burgum posted a picture as he was walking into his dressing room with the Ted Lasso "Believe" up on the door, which I think he needed for motivation last night. And we were talking about the fact that a show like Ted Lasso hitting when it's hit, great writing helps, great casting helps, all that stuff. But there's also the role of the audience, which I'd like to talk a little bit about too, because without the right people to watch at the right time and what we hanker for and when, and I'm going to guide you here specifically, Mike, to tell us a little bit about the experience that you had with CBS and a political drama that you worked on called Ways and Means, starring Patrick Dempsey, and kind of tension, drama, timing. How does all that factor in?
Well, first of all, I love CBS. I love their legal team particularly. No, I was very lucky. I've written a bunch of stuff. I'm in the union. I'm in 2 unions. My former Teamster dad back in Detroit's like, oh, Writers Guild, tough outfit. Might get a paper cut if things get really serious. I retaliate with the great old movie set joke, why did the Teamster step on the snail? Because that little bastard's been following me all day. He wrote that joke, any Teamsters there. You can straighten them out after the meeting. Yeah, no, I pitched something. I had sold HBO something about politics, about mercenaries on the road. And I wanted to do a show about the Congress, because when television does the Congress, it's always beautiful 24-year-olds dropping, I've got to go see that cute guy judiciary, it's like, we got to get out the TPs, and it just, all us real political people just immediately mouth vomit at it all, because the real world's more interesting. And what's interesting about the House is the members. You got everything in the House. It's not like the Senate. You got mustard stains on the tie and drunk veterinarians. Believe me, you have it all in the House. And they have they have friendships and stuff that are all secret. The House gym is where nobody can go but them, and that's where they're allowed to be human.
Yeah.
Now it's shrinking, but it's still there. In fact, when we got greenlit, and I wrote and traded the thing, and had brought in a great partner, Ed Redlake, who's a political junkie. I grabbed Patrick, who was our star, and Ed's a good Bernie Sanders liberal, and a few more, and sent them out to Washington. And they wound up in an elevator with the late, great Jim Clyburn and a famous right-wing loudmouth congressman that they, of course, hate, that would bring any, West Side LA dinner party to pounding anger. And they're like, oh my God, how can they stand to be? And they're like, hey, you going to the thing tomorrow? I'll give you a ride. They couldn't believe it. My God, they're friends. This is pro wrestling. But that was the theory of the show. It was a cynical world where a little hope breaks out, and who knows what could happen. It was Lasso-esque. And I was of the theory then, which it's not on the air, so you know how this story ends. But if you study the Great Depression, the most popular movies were often the ballroom comedies. They were not, I'm starving to death today. So people reach in storytelling often to the opposite. So I thought a political show about cynics starting to remember why they got into this, sparked by a series of mistakes, would be fun. And, it was a great experience. We came close. January 6th basically paralyzed any idea of a politically oriented show on mass TV. It was already a stretch for CBS because we weren't solving a crime in the first 7 minutes. I love them, don't sue me. But Try to convict me on that sentence. So anyway, it was a good experience, but there were a lot of people in CBS who loved the idea about being a show that was a little aspirational about politics. So, and I got to give a lot of credit to Brother Nevis at the top, who kind of made it happen, because it was outside their normal comfort zone.
We just have a minute left, so I want to end on a hopefully optimistic note. If there were the TV show or the film that hasn't been made yet that you feel like would get us on that track to where we want to be, what would it look like, Stephen?
Well, I was just at Millennial Action Project's annual summit, which is called the Future Summit recently, which is a group of state legislators coming together. And those moments are really special because state legislatures don't get as much attention in the national news, but you're seeing a lot more legislative action happening, a lot more constructive areas of policy happening. And one of the legislators really kind of pulled my ear on this. He just said, you know, there's been shows about federal government, there have been shows about local government, as in Parks and Rec. We haven't had that one show about state governments yet. And I can tell you, all the drama, all the incestuous relationships, all the things you would want in the show are happening at that level. But the good news is, to kind of add the hopeful element to this, is that you really can show how through all of these crazy influences and forces in politics that you can ultimately get an idea from a constituent, bring it to your colleagues in the state house or state senate. Maybe you met, I think the gym is a great place actually where a number of people do meet, or happy hour or whatever that is. You actually built a bond. Sometimes you're on the opposite side of the spectrum entirely, but then you decide to co-sponsor a piece of legislation. And I'll just share one example of this. In Wisconsin, there was a movement to do something about sign language interpreters and to support the disability rights community. And they didn't really have an internal champion in the state house. So one of our members decided to be that champion and make a visible reminder of it actually every day by not cutting his hair until that bill passed. And the bill didn't get passed for a while. It was over a year. And so we would do events with him, and his hair, he's got curly hair, just got bigger and bigger and bigger. It got pretty wild. And so ultimately, he's a Democrat. He found a Republican through our efforts and through some social activities as well, who's not a moderate Republican, but a deeply conservative, like almost right-wing Republican to team up on this. They ultimately passed that bill, and he gets the haircut. So I think examples of that are real and exciting, and hope to see a bigger platform for them.
Yeah, the secret is most of them were like class president or chief Rotarian. They want to be friends, but they have staff. Fight, fight, fight. Here's what he said about you on Twitter. He did, and some other 20-year-old staffer wrote the tweet. And so it was, our big thing was these two guys, one had risen to Republican leadership, one to Democratic, started out as young freshmen, were secretly best friends. But they fight on cable TV and call each other names all the time. So a kook shoots his best friend on the streets in front of the Capitol and breaks his life, and off we go to try to do something. I'd love to. I hate remakes because they ruin the movie. But there are two things. One is The Great McGinty was a wonderful political movie, a Preston Sturges picture. Couldn't make it now because it's full of dialogue and no robots fight, but it's still granted. Second, whenever I was in a general meeting and the witching hour of getting out of the valley back to where I live on this side and traffic was threatening, I'd always end the meeting by telling the truth, which is a time-tested Hollywood method. Would you ever want, what kind of feature could really be done about politics? And I would say, the Wendell Willkie story. And I'd count to 25, and then all of a sudden, we're being told, and read the Steve Neal book. Guy out of nowhere becomes a Republican nominee for president. It's 1940, and FDR is losing. Hitler's on the march. FDR wants a draft. It's massively unpopular. So he comes out for the draft to give FDR cover to do it and blows his own campaign because he's more worried about, Nazis than just winning. I think it would be instructive, but it'll never get made. Maybe for Canadian TV or something.
Who'd you cast as Wendell Willkie? If you could?
Oh, it's tricky because you need somebody. He had tremendous charisma. He was kind of a genius small-town lawyer, and he had a mistress who was kind of the brilliant, most powerful woman in New York society who kind of made him. Anyway, Steve Neal, N-E-A-L, wrote a great biography of him. There's also a good book about the 1940 election. But Willkie's a fascinating character.
As are you, Mike Murphy and Stephen Olikara. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of our great panelists, all of our great audience members. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kami.